So the activity that you did in the first part of this lesson is based on Bransford and Johnson's 1972 experiment. They aim to investigate the influence of context on comprehension and memory of text passages. So basically, if someone is provided the context of a specific passage or something that they're going to learn about, is it going to improve their comprehension is basically what they were trying to question. So the experimental design that they used was the independent measures design. This basically means that there were 5 distinctive groups and participants were all allocated to the 5 different groups and did not repeat the measures again and again on the same person. So all participants, like in your case, were put in 5 different groups. And the groups were as follows. So the group 1 was no context. They heard the passage with no context provided to them. Group 1 from our class as well received no context at all. Group 2 received no context but were also allowed to hear the passage twice. I did not go with this group because we have only 16 students. Group 3 had a full context which was presented before the passage. Group 4 had a full context as well, which was presented after the passage was read out. And group 5 had a partial context, which was provided before. So the whole passage, which I will read to you shortly with the context, has 14 different ideas in it. And that is what they were trying to figure out. How many ideas would the participants be able to gather based on the conditions that they were provided. So this is the full context picture. Some of you might have received this and some of you may not have. And this is the partial context that I think group 4 received. So I'm going to read through the passage again and pay attention to the full context while I do so, and check whether you understand this passage a little better. If the balloons popped, the sound wouldn't be able to carry since everything would be too far away from the correct floor. A closed window would also prevent the sound from carrying since most buildings tend to be well insulated. Since the whole operation depends on a steady flow of electricity, a break in the middle of the wire would also cause problems. Of course, the fellow could shout, but the human voice is not loud enough to carry that far. An additional problem is that a string could break on the instrument. Then there could be no accompaniment to the message. It is clear that the best situation would involve less distance, then there would be fewer potential problems. With face-to-face contact, the least number of things could go wrong. So the researchers would hypothesize or have hypothesized that if you have the full context before, it is going to lead to the best comprehension of a passage. If you have no context, it's going to be difficult for you to understand. Let's say, for example, I started the schema lesson with no context provided to you and also started this cognitive approach with no context provided to you. It wouldn't make as much sense to you if I had done that. So the full context, if presented before, was hypothesized to have the best comprehension. The partial context would lead to some amount of understanding but not complete understanding. And when the full context is presented after, it can have kind of similar effects as not having the context at all because you're seeing or exposed to the context right at the end. Okay, so the results that the experimenters had and I have kind of put together for our group is as follows. For the no context, out of the 14 ideas, the participants had 3.6 average idea units, right? So of 14, they were able to understand only 3 points or 4 points on an average. Our group, they gave it an average rating of 4. They did understand separate ideas, but not the whole passage as something that was comprehensive. And I think the average unit of ideas was 3. So for the second group, which is the no context, but they were allowed to hear this passage twice, there was not too much of a difference. So if you have no context and are just trying to understand something by reading it or listening to it again and again, it is likely that you're not going to understand much better. And that is what these two results suggest. So the context before group, which is the third group, had a very significant difference from the first two groups, which was having a total count of 18 out of 14 ideas. So this then suggests that it is good or it is helpful to have context before one goes into learning something new or reading a passage, maybe even traveling, right? And I'll talk about that a little after I've discussed these. So in our group, the average rating that was given was 6. Even though that wasn't necessarily really high, I think most of you in this group were able to understand the passage fairly well, the ideas that it had, but also the passage as a whole. The context after group had 3.6 idea units. Again, like I said, this is not very different from having no context because the context is provided after. In our group, the average was 2.5. Again, that is quite low, although there were quite a few ideas that you were able to grasp, namely about 4 ideas on an average. The partial context had 4 idea units, which again is not very different from all of the other conditions. This again goes on to saying that not having the accurate context can hinder your comprehension. Our group had a highly high rating, and it was a fair understanding of different ideas, but they did not connect because, again, the context provided to you was not complete. Okay, so what is the significance of this? I think for me as a teacher, this is very important information because it allows me to get the idea that for people who are provided the context before they learn something new or hear something or read something, they're able to understand and comprehend the concepts and knowledge that is being provided to them better. And yeah, so for me that is very important as a teacher, and I think for you as students it is important as well to understand the context before you go into reading something new or learning something new. Another thing that I can think of with regards to the significance of the results here is that when reading research papers, right, all research papers have abstracts. This only goes on to saying that we should probably read the abstract first before we go into reading that whole 20-page report, which is so heavily based on psychological terminology, or if it's in other subjects, the terminology relevant to that. So reading the abstract for your research papers is very important so that you already have some kind of understanding of the direction that that research took and are able to better understand the rest of the research. Yeah. So in terms of travel, this is something I think personally relevant. Whenever I travel to a new place, I do like reading books from that area and watching videos to get the historical background or context of that place. So again, this is very personal, so that when I go to that new country or that new area, I'm able to better empathize or understand the culture there and where they're coming from. So again, that makes me feel like I can appreciate the place better and also prevents me from experiencing a culture shock, because now before I've even gone into that area, I have some schemas or understanding of that place. And I think that also helps me be open-minded and sensitive towards maybe the differences that that culture holds. So what you're going to do now is go back into your groups and you're going to discuss and evaluate the research of Bransford and Johnson. I've put up some questions in the flow message, so please use that as guiding questions for your evaluation, but it's not necessary to be limited to that. After you're done with this discussion in your group and also the discussion from the halo effect question, I would like two people, to summarize, one person for the first discussion and one person for the second discussion, and add this on the class group chat. I will be adding 2 different sections. Please reply to that section respectively. If you have any questions, let me know. Tomorrow, on Friday, all HLs and SLs will still be a part of class. I will figure out HL only classes for next week, but we will be looking at more research on schema theory.